Mr Speaker, I'm very happy to stand up and take a call on this bill. I think perhaps I might be one of the only members of Parliament that still currently has a student loan and is still paying that off. So I'm nearly there, Mr Speaker. It's taken me 9 years, but I'm nearly there. So I do have a heart for our students out there who are taking out their student loans with the best intentions, trying to get ahead in this world, trying to do good things for themselves and for their families, Mr Speaker. Now, we are supporting this bill, and I just want to talk about some of the aspects in the bill that we do support. One of them being the fact that it's extending interest-free student loans to borrowers who are present in Niue, the Cook Islands, Tukalau, or the Ross dependency. Now, Mr Speaker, I do think that is a good idea. One thing that we came across when we were on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee trip last year when we went to Niue was the fact that they're suffering from depopulation. So if we can encourage Niueans to go back and work and contribute to their economy over there, and the same with the Cook Islands and other countries, then that's a good thing that New Zealand can do. They talk about the fact that their Pacific people are contributing over here, and I think that it is important that we allow them the opportunities to actually go back and contribute to their countries, especially given we've got something like 22,000 Niueans in this country and only 1,000 on the actual homeland. Now, Mr Speaker, some of the things that have been raised with respect to this bill are around the concerns with what the national government has planned for student loans moving forward. Now, addressing this kind of bill does make alarm bells go off in our head, Mr Speaker. We are concerned with some of the comments that have been made around student loans recently by both the Prime Minister and the new Tertiary of Education Minister Stephen Joyce. The fact that the Prime Minister has just recently said that they were going to take a careful look at the policy settings around student support. Now, Mr Speaker, the concern is, and this is something that we do not trust the government to take seriously, is that so many times they've talked about the number of students that are rorting the system, apparently. Apparently we've heard from them and we've heard from the media that there are students that are doing things like taking out student loans and then saving the money because it's interest-free. Now, that is very much a small minority of the students that actually access these student loans, Mr Speaker. And the vast majority are people that actually need this student loan scheme to ensure that they have the opportunity to take up tertiary study just like anybody else that has money, Mr Speaker. So it is concerning when we hear the National Party talk about student loans and change things around policy to do with student loans because we don't know how far down the track that they're going to go. Now, Mr Speaker, of the something like 13 years that I've spent living in Auckland, 11 of those years have been spent working at the University of Auckland or studying at the University of Auckland. So I've worked with a large number of students, Māori, Pacific, single parents, who rely on the fact that they can access these student loans. If there are going to be any changes down the track which jeopardise the accessibility to student loans, then this country will be in huge trouble. Now, something that has been touched on by Mr Key is the fact that he referred to students who don't take their studies seriously who don't get a job quickly after qualifying. Now, one thing that we do need to recognise, Mr Speaker, is that unfortunately Māori and Pacific students often, the research shows, take longer to complete their degrees. Now, the reason for that isn't anything to do with having lesser intelligence or anything like that. Unfortunately, what we see still is that for many of these Māori and Pacific students, many of them are still the first of their family to go into higher level tertiary education. The culture of the environment at universities is very foreign to what they've ever experienced in their life. So when they go into that environment, many of them struggle with coming to terms with just being in this environment that is completely strange and foreign to what they've ever experienced before. So if they do go down the track of putting limitations on student loans, it will be those Māori, Pacific, and also, I want to talk more about this shortly, sole parents who will be the ones that suffer more than anyone else because of it. Now, what one of my colleagues has already talked about is the fact that the training incentive allowance was cut. Now, already we are getting emails, or we have been since this was announced in the May budget, from women who don't know how they would possibly be able to cope with tertiary level study, with degree level study, if they don't have that tertiary incentive allowance. Now, if we put limitations on student loans, then that will only further serve to marginalise that group, Mr Speaker. And those are aspects that we are concerned about moving forward, and it is important that we do allude the other side to those concerns so that when they are looking at this policy, when they are looking at legislation further, that they do take those considerations seriously, Mr Speaker. One thing that the Greens have brought up is their concern around the aspect of this bill with regards to increasing the amount students in arrears will have taken from their earnings, the increase being from 10 cents in the dollar to 15 cents in the dollar. Now, this is a valid concern that the Greens have raised, but as my colleague, the Honourable Marion Street, referred to before, we do have to make sure that people are using the correct tax codes and not trying to rort the system in any way. Now, I guess the thing that we do need to be cautious about, and that this government does need to watch very carefully, is that, again, it's not certain groups that are affected by the introduction of this clause. We know that Māori, Pacific and women, again, will earn less once they get out into the workforce after having completed their tertiary studies. And if they're women, and if they're sole parents again, and they have children to raise, then increasing the amount from 10 cents in the dollar to 15 cents in the dollar may affect them in their ability to look after their families. So those are some of the things that the government will need to watch very carefully, because we don't want to push through legislation that may marginalise particular groups. And that is one of the concerns, and valid concerns, that has been raised by the Green Party. Now, Mr Speaker, as I was saying before, the direction that this government seems to be taking with student loans is concerning, and as my colleague Chris Hipkins pointed out before, they don't have a good track record with tertiary education, Mr Speaker. They don't have a good track record with tertiary education. They did not, and they do not fundamentally, underneath all the rhetoric, support access to student loans. Now, as I was yelling out before to one of the National Party MPs, chances are the daughter that she spoke of didn't have to access a student loan, Mr Speaker. Chances are anyone working here probably can afford to pay the fees for their child. Now, not everyone has access to that, so we do need to make sure that as a country we are supporting those who don't have access to that type of money to actually go on to tertiary level education. And those are some of the things that we don't trust this government to do, Mr Speaker. We do not trust this government to make sure that every New Zealander has equal opportunity to tertiary education. That is something that has come up in the past. They have voted down legislation, they have voted down policies that this side of the House have put forward over the last 9 years, legislation that have been conducive to ensuring that all New Zealanders have access to tertiary education. So as we head forward into the future, we are aware of the fact that, given the opportunity, they would make changes that would be detrimental to some of the more marginalised groups in New Zealand, Mr Speaker. Now, one thing I wanted to say, Mr Speaker, right there are probably other aspects of the student loan scheme that the government does need to take seriously. The fact that I've seen many students who come through my office over the years whilst working at the university who have been put back or who have been affected negatively by some of the operational matters with respect to student loans, some of the timeliness issues, things like that, Mr Speaker. When a student has to wait 6 weeks to get money in the first semester of the year, they are severely put back with respect to their ability to go to classes. Sometimes they're actually shut out, their ability to get the course outlines and everything else, and that can have a detrimental effect on their success in that first semester or even the first year, Mr Speaker. So there are other matters that relate to the student loan scheme that this government needs to take very seriously and look at as well, with respect to making sure that it works successfully, so that it works efficiently for the students that do need to access the student loans, Mr Speaker. Now, we've pointed out, at the end of the day, if there are further changes made to the student loan scheme and accessibility is affected by the government's ideology around whether or not student loans should be interest-free or how accessible they should be, it will be, Mr Speaker, Māori, Pacific and I think women as well that will be most affected by any possible changes that the government might go down the track of making. We are concerned about that. We've discussed it very broadly amongst our our caucus, and it's something that we're keeping our eye on very closely to ensure that those groups that I've discussed are not affected negatively by government's future policy around tertiary education and the student loan scheme. Thank you very much.
I call David Garrett.
Mr Speaker, this is a good bill, but not a great